Welcome to the Growth Mindset Podcast with me, Sam Harris, your host. I invite fascinating humans from all walks of life to share their wisdom and unpack their mindsets and formulas for growth. On the show today, we have the incredible Keith Wallace, who is the Senior Vice President of Web Summit, which is referred to by Forbes as the best tech conference on the planet. And he is also the General Manager of Collision Conference, which is the American version of Web Summit. And he's done some pretty interesting things with his life and is a massive growth mindset advocate, which is perfect for the show, and runs one of the most interesting conferences. And he has a lot of insights around running some of the most interesting conferences on the planet, which bring together the most amazing collection of different speakers and making brilliant events happen and getting startups, VCs, epic level people involved. And it's just a hive of interesting activity. And if you're doing anything related to like trying to change the world, it's worth going. So a fantastic guest on the podcast to have today. And I'm looking forward to the interview.
Cheers, Sam. Absolute pleasure to be here.
So on to the general theme of the podcast. I like to understand how people sort of shape their lives from like how they grew up and then how they got into what they're doing. So could you quickly introduce to me like what your background was like growing up and what you thought were the traits that sort of led you to where you are now?
Yeah, 100%. I grew up in a small town at the south of Dublin in Ireland. Very, very calm town, very easygoing. Grew up in a nice household, and I was always brought up in a household where we were kind of encouraged to question or to be curious, never to feel like you knew it all. So my older brother probably had a lot of those values. He did a lot of work in science and kind of did his PhD further down the road. So he was always very kind of science or mathematical led, which meant he always wanted to be right. He always wanted to find the value of truth in anything and not just take it on face value. So I think that was probably something that was always instilled in me quite young, is just kind of question everything, be curious about everything. Never be the smartest man in the room is that kind of classic phrase, but it's that kind of idea that always try to be learning. I think that's something I've always kept throughout my kind of career or growing up. I would say when I was looking for a career, I probably took a slightly different route than a lot of your previous guests. I listened to one of your recent podcasts with a marine biologist who kind of said, but it was always my dream to be a marine biologist.
Yeah.
I was like,
oh, that's nuts.
It was like, it's definitely never always been my dream to run conferences or to help plan conferences. But I think it's just interesting how these paths get taken and how you kind of come along. So if I go back to my school years, I did accounting in college and worked in finance for 5 years. Personally, it was never a dream of mine to be an accountant. It's not something as a young boy.
Sounds like a thing that your parents told you to do.
100%. I father that was a teacher and a mum that was an accountant. It was very much like get a steady, good job that'll be recession proof was always the classic line. But I did accounting for 5 years and I realized it just wasn't for me. No matter how hard I worked, I just couldn't get interested in it. I probably fell into it because it's a classic standard business degree. You can go left and right from it. But I realized after 5 years, I just hated it, to be quite frank. Like I really just did not like going to work every day. So if I'm going to do something for the next 40, 50 years of my life, I need to find something that I'm interested in. So I went back to university at nighttime. I did a master's in advertising. And that was a game changer for me, to be honest. It was all of a sudden I'd opened up a door to an industry where I was interested. I was learning every day. I was on my days off. I was interested in what ads were happening, what marketing was happening. And it just kind of started to quench my thirst for knowledge and really start my journey on being a lifelong learner. Like really just, okay, well, we can improve every day. We can learn every day. And over the course of a period, it'll compound and you'll get better and better. So I did advertising and worked in an agency for about 5 years. Worked with brands like Heineken and Ford and Nestle. Really enjoyed my time there. A lot of creativity, just very different skill sets than the finance world. But after about 5 years working there, I saw how much technology was disrupting the advertising world and how Facebook and Google were just eating away traditional media's budgets. And it's kind of after a few years of seeing this happening. I was working when Facebook just launched their mobile app and decided that they were going down the advertising route, and to see their growth over the course of 2, 3, 4 years, just eating all the advertising budget, made me realize that technology is kind of where the future is going. And then started looking around the classic Facebook and Google's and kind of the big tech companies that were setting up headquarters in Ireland. And then through my role, I ended up going to Web Summit a couple of times just as a client or being part of a campaign through my advertising partners. Ford would have been one of them that had quite a large presence. And Bill Ford, the CEO at the time, came to speak in Dublin. And just after being at the conference, you kind of start to, you get a little bit mesmerized by it. It's the hustle bustle of activity. You've been there, you've seen it. Just so many startups, so many founders pitching, so many large tech speakers, the kind of the Goliaths of advertising agencies were there. And I was just enamored by it. And so started hunting down contacts in Web Summit and went through a very, very lengthy interview process. And then about 6 years ago, joined the company, and kind of where I've been for the last 6 years. For the first 3, focused on building their kind of customer success team. So any of those big brands or startups or attendees that on board, that team would manage them. I built that team over a few years with a close friend, Christina Nelligan. And then for the last 3 years, I've been living in Toronto, helping set up the Canadian event, Collision. And really the goal is to build Collision into what Web Summit is. So Web Summit's, you've been there, a large scale 70,000 person event. Collision is like the little brother or little sister. And the goal now is to replicate what we've done successfully in Europe in North America.
Yeah, nice. It's certainly interesting. I think I had some good advice from a friend being like, when you're not too sure what to do, if you think you can get early in on a wave and kind of ride that going forwards, you're always going to be in like a good position. And it sounds kind of like you kind of saw that coming with Web Summit and just like the rise of tech, and these kind of events are going to be just massively growing and useful, and kind of got involved with something that's just really super interesting and a useful wave to be on. That makes sense.
I didn't know a lot about the startup world or VC funding. And I was probably in Web Summit for about a year when the big talk was funding is going to dry up. We've hit the peak. The startup scene is going to start dropping. And there was a little bit of like worry internally, like, is this true? Will this happen? But it's amazing how the growth has continued. And even during the pandemic, it's even doubled down again. And I think now we're starting to see a little bit of a stagnation. But compared to where we were 3 years ago or 5 years ago, the funding rounds are just huge. There's more unicorns today than there's ever been in the world. And you know yourself, having gone through Techstars, what it takes to be a founder. And it's no mean feat. It's no mean feat. I have a lot of respect for anyone that builds their own company.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of a tangent, but I have noticed the amount of friends I've had, like just having sort of massive mental health breakdowns and like panic attacks and stuff for months on end. And I'm like, whoa, this wasn't so talked about as part of the like be a founder, change the world thing.
It's so stressful. True.
Yeah. And also it's not just like the ones having difficulties, like some of the ones that are smashing all their funding rounds and having every success and stuff are also like, just seems to be stressful, whatever happens.
It really is. But be it being successful or not being successful, there's a lot of stress and a lot of weight on your shoulders.
Definitely. Like I have realized that I really like stress in some ways. Like I get to sleep bored without stress, and so I also go and do ultra marathons and other idiotic things. But I also responsibility isn't my favorite thing always. I've been coming to realize, as far as going through my CEO journey, I'm kind of like, okay, the way I like working is more sort of like 3 months, absolutely head down, execute, but then like have a month off where no one's going to call me and stuff. And trying to fit that into running a startup isn't ideal in working out who I need to have around me. Like, okay, actually, I really need operations people that run the show, and I'm less responsible for some stuff. And okay, I'm not going to be the one that's sort of in on all the details necessarily. And there's more of like, okay, I'm going to big ideas. I'll go and make great speeches and talk to cool people and network like hell and stuff. And then other people will deal with stuff.
But that's great.
So as long as you're able to recruit the right people, it's okay. Otherwise, you can just sort of have this idea of being great and just massively mess things up. So introspection, for sure. So
I'm going to say that I think there's a lot around that in terms of you see some of the startups coming through, Web Summits are coming through the alumni over the years and them raising different rounds, capital at different stages and being at different growth stages. And you can see the evolution of some of the founders from founder to CEO to, okay, the CEO role might not actually work with them and they should bring in a different CEO and their skill set is more on the biz dev or being the operations person and how it fluctuates, that the person to bring the company to 50 or to 200 employees might not be the same person that needs to bring from 200 to 1,000 or 1,000 onwards. There's definitely different skill sets, and realizing that early enough and putting in the right people to support that journey is so crucial to the success of these companies.
Yeah, definitely is. I think it's part of where you realize the value of like having the good mentors and things as well that kind of can call you out on those things. As you went around like a bit of a headless chicken initially, and then be a bit more strategic. You're like, oh, that's what strategy means. Like, I thought it's just doing stuff, but it turns out working out who's doing stuff and why and when is actually really important.
That's it. It's being busy for the sake of being busy's sake, or actually being productive.
Yeah, definitely. So on the subject of like difficulties, and so where would you put yourself if you sort of were to define like your own characteristics? Would you say you're more of like the kind of executor, like getting into the details and sort of making sure everything's sort of ticking all the boxes and things? Or are you more of like the creative, like what's a box?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think when I first got into advertising, I had built in myself that I wasn't a creative person. And this is probably 5 years of working in finance and spreadsheets and numbers. And probably even being younger, I think because I couldn't paint or draw, I didn't think I was creative. And then I remember having a lecturer years ago when I was doing my advertising course called Creative Thinking. And she was talking about how creativity is a skill you can learn. And that was a game changer for me. And hearing that, and then going down the rabbit hole of different TED Talks that she would recommend or different books she would recommend, and learning that it really is a skill and you can get better and better. And the creative part of your brain is something you can train, was absolutely game changing just to open up my mind. So then when I started working in advertising, I started leaning into that creativity a lot more and really enjoying that. And all of a sudden, as the years gone on, I was like, oh, okay, I truly believe that you can be both left-sided and right-sided brain.
Yeah.
You don't put yourself in a box.
Definitely.
As soon as you do that, you just hinder any growth, which is a crazy thing. And I always try to make sure my sister, who's an accountant now, I'm always trying to explain that to her. It's like, just because you're an accountant doesn't mean you don't have to be creative. Going on a bit now to when I joined Web Summit, I think the first few years, the role and the job I did was very operational based. And it was how we could build this team, how we could scale this team, and how we could scale this team with the future proof of making sure we could scale it even further and further. So when I joined, the conference was about 40,000. We probably had about 200 partners globally. And it was a case of, well, what if we wanted to do 10 conferences of 40,000 people? How would we onboard 1,000 partners instead of 200 partners? So you start to think about, okay, well, operationally, we have to build the foundations correctly so that we can onboard without just hiring more and more people and do it kind of in a system that'll scale. So I think for the first few years, I really dived into the operation side of things. And for the last 3 years, I would say I've taken a bit more of a step back and looked at the strategic run. And how do you scale a conference? You need to take a step back out of the operations and look at it more from a macro environment. And this is a skill that I think I've been learning more and more over the last 3 years, and probably something that I enjoy more now. So I think it's at different stages, just leaning into what's important at that stage, and then hopefully being able to pull those skill sets that you learn in different areas or different challenges and bringing them with you as you go on throughout your career, I think is the way I would view it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the point of like experience and having like a diverse range of different things you've done that you can actually put together and come up with some really unique sets of strengths, which makes you, which is nice. And certainly on the whole, like creativity isn't something you're just born with necessarily. I think there's lots of things around like personality profiling and things that sort of make you think that you are a specific way, or like you are an introvert, you are expressive, whatever. And it doesn't really account for the fact that there's lots of things you can learn. Maybe some limits on the sort of things that you can do, like you're not going to become like perfect pitch, etc., or whatever, but you can still radically change how much you appreciate those different parts of you, I feel, and like what you can express. It's nice. So it's good to hear. And something I found like with climbing is then you can try doing like a route and it seems like completely impossible, and you just practice it twice, and then next thing you know, you just do it, and it's like quite simple, and you just have these blockers in front of you. And it's the same with trying to whatever form of creativity that is.
Yeah, totally. And it always generally starts with a limiting belief. When someone has taught you or told you at quite an early stage that you're better suited to something else, or you can't do this, and then you just tell yourself throughout the years that you can't do that, or I'm not that type of person.
Yeah. It's just like a sort of an easy barrier, like, cool, this is what I'm operating within, like guidelines of gravity and stuff. So I like to think of like the whole first principles of physics, like, does something break the rules of physics? No. So probably it can be done. Which does run into issues when it comes to law, but that's a different matter. Yeah, nice. On the subject of breaking the law, you said accounting doesn't mean that you can't be creative. That sounds like a definitely line for tax avoidance and stuff with creative accounting. I'm not sure what you were meaning there.
It was more so, not that you can't be creative in accounting, more so that as an accountant, I was so analytical driven and very much focused on certain skill sets in that job and career, where internally I didn't think I was creative. So I didn't lean into any creative elements outside of work. I just didn't see myself as a creative person.
This number must equal that one. It's like rigid, etc.
Exactly. But the realization that you can still be a creative person, but doing accounting, like an accountant can still be a painter. It was that I hadn't associated the two of them until that course I did in university and that lecture. And the small thing can make such a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. It had similar things where I think you realize as a teacher sort of the power that you have, or like the random moments that people latch onto suddenly, where like you'll be telling someone the same thing and like they'll just be ignoring it, and then suddenly sometimes like a sparkle will hit and stuff. And
totally,
you don't know when this thing's going to happen, so you just have to keep on like giving potential for something epic to come out.
Yeah, it shows you how malleable the human brain is and how powerful words can be. I think people can be very adamant at times, and I've always tried to err on the line of caution about, giving some advice. You can only impart a little bit of your thought process and what you've experienced, but be quite careful in kind of how much you dictate or force someone to think a certain way, I would say.
Yeah, 100%. And you can definitely give people kind of rigid sets of thinking by accident, just when you sort of nonchalantly sort of say like, this doesn't happen, or you won't be good at that, etc. Yeah.
Exactly.
Anyway, I did want to ask you about what's been like the biggest failure during a conference, because it just seems like there's so much stuff going on. Like, it's a huge thing. You've got like entire taxis and the amount of like VIPs and things there. There must have been some pretty interesting complete cock-ups.
There certainly has been. Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, going back to live events, it's human nature. It's like live TV. Stuff is going to go wrong. You just have to be prepared that everything won't be as smooth sailing as you can plan effectively as you want, but stuff will just naturally go wrong. And I think being in the live event space, for anyone that's working in it, they'll all know and say the same thing. You have to be a certain mindset and kind of personality type to be able to not overthink or overstress when stuff goes wrong and just go straight into problem solving mode. There's been so many problems, but the one that always sticks in my mind is the one that happened the first year we were in Collision in Toronto. To give you kind of the story of what happened, I'll go back a little bit about when we first decided to move to Collision to Toronto. So Collision used to be in New Orleans for a few years. We moved it to Toronto. What? We did it. Yeah, it was cool. I know. We did it in Vegas for a couple of years before that as well. So it's moved cool. Around. Yeah. New Orleans is a great city, fun city, but the tech scene wasn't there at the time.
Yeah, that's not crazy.
So we moved to Toronto, and whenever you move a conference to a new city or a country, you have to kind of meet the tech ecosystem, explain who or what you are, or what you're trying to do, and bring them along the journey and get them excited as well, because you're really there for them. So when I moved to Canada first, it was very much like, how do we tell the story of what Collision is? You've been to Web Summit. It's one thing talking about it. It's another thing actually witnessing and seeing it. So what we went around doing is bringing a large Canadian delegation to Web Summit. So I worked with the City of Toronto, I worked with the Mayor's office, I worked with the Canadian federal government. We brought about 500 Canadians over to Lisbon, built them a little Canadian pavilion right in the center, in the heart of Web Summit, brought the mayor over, Mayor John Tory, and brought him on a tour of kind of Web Summit, explained the inner workings, had him front and center on opening night and his kind of delegation. So they got to see the kind of magic of that center stage, which is a 17,000 person Cedar Stadium. Set up lots of meetings with him. So I had him meet the Secretary General for the United Nations, Antonio Gutierrez, had him meet the Mayor of Lisbon. And it was at that meeting with the Mayor of Lisbon, he kind of turned to the Mayor and said, what's the most important thing to get right bringing this conference to Toronto? The Mayor of Lisbon just said, Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi. just get the Wi-Fi right. It's a huge undertaking to give 70,000 people Wi-Fi within a conference. That was the thing. So every time I met the mayor after that, Mayor Tory in Toronto, it's like, will the Wi-Fi work? Will the Wi-Fi work? It's like, yes, it will. Yes, it will. Have assurances. Yes, it will. Yes, it will. Obviously, you know where this is going. When day one of the conference happens, we have kind of 25,000 people in the conference. There's multiple talks happening. There's partners networking on the floor. There's startups pitching. Out of nowhere, the Wi-Fi just crashes. And in that moment, you just go into kind of panic mode and troubleshooting and, okay, well, what's happening? Within about 5 minutes of the Wi-Fi going off, the fire alarm started going off. Nice. So now all of a sudden you have 25,000 people in the event, no Wi-Fi, and the fire alarm going off. You're like, okay. So you're on your radio, you're talking to different teams. The production team are figuring out the fire alarm, the IT team are figuring out the Wi-Fi. And then you just have to go around to the individual speakers and pushing back talks and managing partners that are doing business deals that all of a sudden they can't take their attendees' data. There's just so many issues. They can't do kind of show and tell with their products anymore. Startups are freaking out. So it's really just fight or flight mode. And you're trying to troubleshoot, trying to fix stuff. Luckily, we managed to put a bandage on the Wi-Fi and get it up and running until later on that evening. And the tech team were able to come in and really do a proper deep dive on it. But we turned the fire alarm after a few minutes. So it was like 5-10 minutes. Schedules were delayed. I'd say that was the biggest, and I could just hear the mayor's voice in my head constantly. Will the Wi-Fi work? Will the Wi-Fi work? I was like, crap, oh my God, how did that not work? But look, these are all learnings coming into this year. It's wild, actually. That was 2019. This is the first year we're back to a live event since then in Toronto. So it's all been about like meeting with the mayor again. It's like, Keith, will the Wi-Fi definitely work this time? Like, we're bringing in a third-party telco. We've doubled or tripled or quadrupled the IT team. So it's all about just more planning, more stress testing. Very hard to stress test 35,000 people being in the same room at the same time. But I feel a lot more confident coming in this year now than I did in 2019.
Yeah, interesting. Because you feel like there's actually certainly a problem with other festivals when like you go to like Glastonbury or something and you just can't get any reception. But there's not Wi-Fi as such. But
yeah, well, one of the things that's different at our event versus some competitor events is we give Wi-Fi complimentary to everyone in the conference. So the app is your passport, your schedule, your ticket. It's absolutely really everything. And it's something we've built inside. So it's something we've always worked hard to get right. Where if you go to some of our competitor events, there might be Wi-Fi pockets. Like if you stand here, you'll get free Wi-Fi or different areas. Something we've always wanted to have, but it comes with its own problems and band load and kind of trying to get that signal strength right across 70,000 or 35,000 people. It's a tricky process.
Yeah. Sounds like a nightmare. Bit more of a tech thing, I guess. Yeah. So besides having good Wi-Fi and not having everyone pissed off, how else do you make an event like cool and the aspirational place to go to and get to? Because I feel like there must be a bit of a playbook that you must have taken from Web Summit for Starting Collision and Rise as well and things. And what would be like the most important thing that you would say if you were going to run any kind of conference? Let's say I wanted to run my own NFT conference, for example.
I think that's quite a hard question to answer because you really have to figure out, well, what's the main purpose of the conference and start from the start. So for Web Summit, our founder, Paddy Cosgrave, had a very clear vision that he wanted to make sure that everyone could connect. So making sure everyone could network as effectively as possible. So if you bring venture capitalists over to a conference and you have startups there, your whole goal will be to make sure the best VCs meet the best startups so that they can do investments in deal flow. And that's a specific experience that you have to give those cohorts, where a speaker might come and they're coming to do a talk, but they might also be coming to meet startups to acquire or to meet other corporate speakers to do business deals with. So you have to give them a different experience. If you're coming as an attendee, I might be a developer and I'm coming to look for a new job or learn about the latest protocol that's happening in one of the computer languages. So it really just depends on who your attendee base is and what their goal is. So I think that's the core of it. You have to make sure that you're treating each attendee group that you're bringing has a different objective and how you're going to manage that. That's kind of the core of what we do. So it's all around networking. And that's why we kind of built our own IT in-house and built our own app to make sure that that's the best tool for networking that we can provide people is you open your app based on the information you give. We'll feed you people that we recommend you should talk to. We'll feed you recommended talks you should go to, events you should be at. So it's giving everyone their own curated experience. I think if you're building an event, coming from what's the problem solution situation is the most important thing. How to make an event cool is a slightly different piece. And I think that's probably happened through the years of Web Summit, some by design, some by chance. Again, it's what's the definition of cool, I suppose, to start from there. Well, is it having the coolest
you want to appeal
celebrities?
to?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So there's a couple of stories that always stick out in my mind. One is the classic celebrity story, which I think worked really well, which was a very early story, which is in Dublin. Our last year in Dublin, we did these night events, and we had one where Bono led Elon Musk on a pub crawl around Dublin. That's not something you can plan for, but it's also things have to go right. But that become a story now, and you can recount that story, and it gets other founders or celebrities excited about what could happen at the event.
Yeah.
I always think of our event, they're a tech-centric event. It's all around innovation. So you'll be in the middle of a Web Summit with all these founders pitching startups and tech CEOs. And then I remember seeing Rosario Dawson just walking through the crowd, or Ronaldinho just walking through the crowd. And because they're not big tech names, people didn't even realize who they were. Like, you'd have the odd person, but they weren't. The celebrities were the president of Microsoft or the CTO of Amazon. They were the revered
Wow. You
people,
think they
but
were
those celebrities
recognized?
People recognize them, but I think that for me was one of the cool things. It's allowing these celebrities to walk through without getting hounded and hassled by everyone.
Yeah.
Which I think Gary Vee was actually one of the people I saw was hounded them out most at one of our events because there's so many tech entrepreneurs there, and he's an outspoken entrepreneur. He was one of the ones where he had security all around him. But some of the mainstream celebrities weren't the same.
Yeah, I met Tim Draper at Web Summit, who was just wandering around talking to random startups, and most of them didn't really know who he was. Just this guy with big eyebrows wandering around that seemed nice. And I was like, I think I know who that is. Got out my phone and was like, yes, it is Tim Draper.
Yeah.
I'll go talk to him. Yes.
That's exactly it. It's the beauty of having, we have 1,200 speakers at Web Summit, and they're all at that quality. We work really hard to make sure that they're kind of at the best in either tech or their respective field. So you have these amazing speakers just walking the floor, just talking to startups and networking as regular people. And I think that's really some of the magic that makes the event special.
Yeah, big time. As certainly, and as you were saying at the start, around just working out what people are there for and giving them the networking experience. So one thing I've found is one of the reasons why I like podcasting so much is it's like an excuse. It's not just creating a podcast and making some content. It's also like a really nice way to connect with people and have an interesting conversation and like find out more things for myself and to grow my network and to sort of establish some kind of like thought leadership and things all at once. And it's great. In the same way, it's kind of like it gives you the reason to have that conversation with someone that then gives you everything else. And so like with the conference, you have like the people on stage giving a talk, like the sort of the podcast content part that is the reason for everything else to happen around it. And I'm like, I couldn't just randomly book in deep, introspective 1-hour chats with people who are epic like Tim Draper for no reason. So I need to have a podcast. But for the conferences, could you actually run a conference where you have all the same people but without any of the stages or talks? Because of like, you don't necessarily need to go to the stages or talks to actually have the amazing conference experience where you get to like meet random crazy people and learn lots about like the industry and stuff. And has anyone ever tried to make a conference without like the conference-y part?
So it's a funny concept, and I'd agree there is an element of that. So I'll give you an example. So we do Web Summit, RFC, large scale event, a lot of speakers. You have different people coming from different reasons, and the speakers that come on stage, they'll walk the floor, but then in our speaker lounge is where they'll network amongst each other a huge amount. So because we don't pay our speakers and we don't allow people to buy their way onto stage, everyone who's come to speak is coming because they want to be there. They have something to say. They're a new product launch or a new topic that they're kind of trying to break through. So they come for a reason, but we make sure that they get a lot of value by networking with each other as well. We set up a lot of business meetings behind closed doors. But on the side of our events, we do a couple of private events. So we do one called one we actually called Corporate Innovation Summit, which is for 250 CIOs or people leading innovation. So it's a lot of our corporate speakers, and we give them a one-day private event that it has some stage content, but not really. It's more about peer-to-peer roundtable sessions, more about networking dinners, networking drinks. And it's about getting those people together just so they can hang out and talk to each other and build their own network. We have one called Founders, which is at the very end of Web Summit. So you get 1,500 startups or 2,000 startups that come to exhibit. And then we cherry pick 150 of the fastest growing startups. And we only allow one founder per company attend this event. So it becomes a very high level networking event from these kind of unicorns of tomorrow. And then we create these unique experiences. So it's not about the stage content. It's just about them peer-to-peer roundtables, networking events, and then these money can't buy experiences. Like we played a game of football in Benfica Stadium where Rui Costa and Nuno Gomez or doing a Tour de France bike tour around Lisbon with Bradley Wiggins. So you're creating these unique experiences that they're having with a new cohort that they haven't met before. And then all of a sudden they're creating these new memories while networking with kind of peers. And I think that kind of networking is probably as close to as we've come to creating an event without the stage content. It's more about the experiences and the networking and the peer-to-peer conversations. So I think it's possible to answer your question, but I think it's a much smaller scale and very targeted towards those cohorts.
Yeah, definitely. It's like I never worked around like the podcast conundrum of like, exactly. Like it requires the podcast. It's just totally interesting. But certainly like the extra things you unlock besides the things in the conference that can happen more. And also like one of the great things, as in, I don't want to like unsell your thing, but as in you could go to Lisbon during Web Summit without a Web Summit ticket and you could still have a good time in terms of all of the fringe events that just happen. There's so many meetups for free where you just get to go to parties and like it's still pretty epic. So if the conference is sold out, you wouldn't need a ticket, but I would still recommend getting a ticket because the conference part is amazing as well. Just let's put it that way. Because of its so well done.
Yeah, where I see that happening a lot, I went to South by Southwest recently, and that would be definitely a conference where around the fringes, there's a huge amount of activity, private events, dinners, drinks, very similar to Web Summit. I remember there was a Solano conference off the back of Web Summit, and there was all these different meetups. And naturally, when you bring that many people to a city, there's just so much that happens off the fringes of it. So you're dead right. I'd always recommend buying a ticket and coming to the event, but there's absolutely so much happening around the event as well.
Yeah, nice. One thing I wanted to ask around, so obviously you have, for podcasting, I have to try and ask people interesting questions and things, and you have lots of people answering big questions around the future of different things. Like what would you say is usually the most interesting sort of question that you hear people asked on stages that you're like, when someone asks this, you're always like, yes, I want to know what the hell this person's thinking?
It's such a good question, and I'm going to give you a really bad answer, unfortunately. It's so specific to the person, especially at our events. I literally just started my own podcast as part of Collision there last week, which was mentioned to you, and we had Peter Corte yesterday, who's the Chief Technology and Strategy Officer of Siemens. So 300,000 person company, and he looks after all the technology and all the strategy for it. The questions I can ask him versus the questions I would ask, we have Boss Beauties, the CEO or the founder of Boss Beauties, an NFT startup. The questions that I ask two of them are very different because I'm being so specific on their company, their industry, and what they're building.
Yeah.
I think across our stages, there's so many different industries that it's so specific to what they're building. I think with a podcast like yours, it's excellent because it's more about the growth mindset. It's about what they've learned, their values. So I'm probably going to defer to Tim Ferriss and how he operates, which is what you kind of, I find is similar to how you, but probably where you've got a lot of your inspiration from that growth mindset. The question that he used to always ask was, what's the best purchase you've made, or what purchase in the last kind of 6-12 months under $100 has made the biggest impact on your life? And out of all the questions I've heard, I love that question because I'm just lapping up all of the people on his podcast that's actually answered that and going off and buying all these little bits and pieces.
Yeah, definitely. It's, I think I agree with what you're saying. I think to a good question is something that involves like a lot of empathy and understanding for the guest that you have, and can take the guest to a level that they wouldn't have got to if you just asked them like what was a good question to ask them, because of often people don't know what they necessarily want to sort of dive into and things, and like being able to kind of notice that is like really difficult. Whereas like of the standard questions, the what's the one purchase is a really good one for just, it's something actionable in terms of if you want to create content that changes people's lives, the answer very easily describes why this action changed their life, and it's something I can literally just go and do for under $100. I can go and buy that thing, and if it is going to change my life, if I want that, I can buy that experience. So it is actually like a really easy, collectible take-home one.
I have to ask you, Sam. Done a lot of podcasts now. What's your favorite question to ask?
So I'm outside of the ones that are specific to like the person where you kind of dive into something really crazy deep. So I really enjoy risk, and so it's a bit of a gambling question, as in like I get terrible answers and I also get really good answers. And the question is, what's one of the earliest memories that's like vivid that you have? And you sometimes get these epic stories from people that did like crazy shit when they were like 3 years old. And it's just like, wow. And it's like shaped the rest of their life. And you get other people like, I'm not really sure what, I couldn't really have a good memory, or it's just like, yeah, I think my mum put me in some clothes or something. And it's just like, nothing happens. But like sometimes you get this crazy gold, and like no one ever really asks that question as well. So people are always a bit surprised, and it's just a bit different and odd. So I kind of like
smart
that in that sense. The problem is that my editor doesn't always tell when to take that question out, and sometimes leaves it in, and it's just really boring for like 3 minutes. And I'm like, you have to remove that, you know? Yeah.
Brilliant.
So that's a good one. Cool. So, a few final questions then are, what would you advise yourself when you were younger in terms of, do you think you could have got to being happier faster, or like not wasting time being frustrated, etc.?
Yeah, I would say it's probably something that took me a few years. It's going from finance to advertising, or finding that passion point and something that's interesting that you want to do as a career. I would probably have told myself to start looking for that a little bit earlier. I think it's quite a hard thing to do as you're a teenager and as you're growing up, to figure out what it is you want to do long term. And I think there's a lot of pressure probably put on people to figure out their whole life as you're coming into your leaving Southern Ireland, your GCSEs. I think there's so much pressure put on yourself or put on society for that reason. And I think if we just took a step back and actually like, what are you interested in? What do you actually enjoy? What gets you excited? And asking those questions a little bit earlier will probably get you to a happier and more successful place quicker than just doing something I went into accounting because it was safe. It was a way to make money, and it could lead to other reasons. But I wasn't interested in it. So I didn't go the extra mile learning about it or trying it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's super important, especially also just showing the potential of kind of careers that you could actually have. Yeah. As in like advertising is something you could do if you did some creative subjects kind of thing. And that is like a great safe career, just like accounting, and just showing like the fun things that you get to do if you do stuff that's kind of fun. Cause I totally was like, finished my GCSEs and with A-levels. Well, I loved art and music, but it was like, well, obviously I can't do those. I'm going to have to do maths and physics and science. I'm good at these things, and these are proper subjects, etc. And
exactly.
Yeah.
That mindset is so damaging. And it took me a while. I would also say, in that same respect, don't put too much pressure on yourself to figure everything out. You'll probably have multiple careers through your life. So find something that's interesting, and you can learn and you can build skill sets. But you might go into, like I've had so far, my short career, I've already been in 3 different industries, and skill sets cross over. Don't be afraid to get into a different industry and start from the start. I'd actually probably add one more as well, which I only realized after joining Web Summit, is to think bigger and to think globally. I think for the first decade of my career, I was so specific to Ireland, and probably even more specific to Dublin. And the reality of when you start working with people in New York or in Asia or around the world, everyone's the exact same. And the internet has made communication and outreach so easy that, think outside your own city or country and think globally, because people are the exact same or have the same problems or same opportunities anywhere in the world. The quicker you realize that, the more the world opens up for you.
Yeah. That's really good advice. Nice. Thanks.
No worries.
What is one of the kindest things that someone has done for you?
Interesting. I would say career-wise, it was probably the person that gave me my first chance in advertising, because I was in finance. I was doing this course at nighttime, and I went for an interview in this media agency. Didn't get the job because I didn't have the experience. And then about a month later, another road opened up, and I emailed one of the managers that had interviewed me previously. And she did a call with me and talked me through the new role, the new interview, told me that I 100% should go for it, and just helped coach me through the interview process a little bit. And that was a game changer, because it led me on the path to where I am now and changed my career. So I think her just giving me that little bit of time and encouragement to go for it, even though I didn't have experience, was massive. In a life perspective, I'd probably look at kind of more recent years, and I don't know if kindness is the right word, but a close friend introduced me to my current partner, which is quite rare, I think, nowadays, to meet someone through a friend. And that, again, that was a few years ago. It's completely changed my life for the better as well. So I'd say both of those things are kind of two pivotal moments.
Yeah, for sure. It's certainly like the one that you have like a huge amount of gratitude for, but it is, as in often, it can be like a pretty small thing, and it's not that much extra effort for someone to like actually think, okay, actually, you're single, my friend's also single, maybe, like you guys seem kind of similar.
Totally.
Like they put themselves out there a little bit, suggesting it because you maybe hate each other and like they feel bad or whatever, but like it's probably worth it just in case. And so like, if you're listening and you're thinking about maybe suggesting, just do it. You never know. Because like, I've got a few friends that I've introduced to are like still together and like getting engaged in things, and it's like, wow, I feel so responsible. It's great. Yeah,
it's amazing. Like what better can you give than the gift of introducing someone that they're going to spend the rest of their life with? Like that's an incredible thing to do.
Thank you so much for listening to the show, and thank yourself. Your consistency and persistency is where it's at. Legend! I truly hope you learned something today, and if you didn't, then I failed. But there's no failure if you learn from it, so help me out by connecting in the Podvine app, where any feedback is genuinely appreciated. Thanks. You can also support me on Patreon for early access to full interviews. I am Sam Harris, and you are here to put a dent in the universe. So keep learning, keep growing, and until next time, stay curious. Curious.